Wow, so many different questions, and I just want to try to touch on a few of them. On the question of the G2, because I think it gets to this larger issue of where we will go in terms of perceptions of the relationship between Washington and Beijing, and then expand that out into perceptions of the relationship between New Delhi and Beijing, or Tokyo and Beijing. We had 40 years of the hopes that eventually we would get to something like this G2. And I think all different countries had that. I think if you look to Tokyo, they had their hopes as well, that there would be this understanding that the cooperative nature of the relationship would help structure many of the problems that Japan, for example, was facing. And I would think that India, in its own way, certainly when we saw early on BRIC arguments and the like, also made the assumption that Beijing would become an increasingly constructive partner, and none of that has really come to the fore. And so the G2, well, look, let me start with the first political reaction, which is that if former Vice President Biden is elected president in November, then I think you will see a resurgence of the engagement school. I think that the people around him have, first of all, committed their professional careers to it. I think that dispositionally, it's how they view relations between the United States and China, and that you will see this reversal of what President Trump has done. Now, to some degree, I don't think you can unwork everything that has been the focus on the Trump administration. I think on the trade policies, for example, this was really driven by the Democratic side in the U.S., was to make the trade policies more fair, because it worked against U.S. workers and the like. So I think that there will be pressures on a Biden administration, but for the most part, I think you will see the rhetoric shift very dramatically back towards cooperation. And I think, quite honestly, that's going to be a mistake. I think that Beijing has perfected the art of telling us what we want to hear while pursuing its own policies. And I think for 40 years it has done that, so that it will look with anticipation towards a Biden administration that's going to be saying all the right things, and it will be reciprocated by Beijing saying all the right things, and that the U.S. is going to lose more and more ground. I think we will lose ground on the One Belt, One Road. The blue dot will probably just be passing into history. I think we will lose ground in the seas. I think we will lose ground on cyber and the like. So, pardon me, I'm actually quite worried about that. Sorry about that. On the question of the Quad, I think the time has come. I think it's very clear that an initial Quad that was proposed back in the mid 2000s, the time was not ready. But I think the time is ripe now for a new Quad, and a new perception that the Quad is necessary, not because we want an adversarial relationship with China, but because the cooperative structures and mechanisms that we hoped we would see have not developed. Let me turn the question around just a little bit. The big argument we have today in the United States is, is there a new Cold War with China? And it's often asked, are we in a new Cold War, or is the U.S. pursuing a Cold War strategy? And I think that gets the question backwards. The real question is, does Beijing believe it's in a Cold War with us? And I think the answer to that is yes. And it shows that through its actions. And I think at this point is where we have to start being very careful to once again talk about ideology and talk about the role of the CCP. Under Xi Jinping, the CCP has shrunk the sphere of civil society in China that so many of us engaged with colleagues in their universities, or in their think tanks, or in their non-governmental organizations. The CCP has also shrunk the sphere of government in China, putting the party back on top of the government, reversing the reforms, or the evolution, if we want to call it that way, of the Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin era. So that when we talk with government officials in Beijing today, they are often thinking first and foremost about their party role rather than their government role. That Xi Jinping has doubled down on, for example, the role of ideology, whether it's document number 9 or others. So these are all the ways in which the way that we thought we might have a G2 or we thought we might have this larger cooperative relationship, themselves have been undermined by actions that Beijing has freely taken. I'm not even talking about the coronavirus that began in Wuhan. We just found out, of course, that it never even informed the WHO, the World Health Organization, about the virus, but that the WHO found out about it through the internet. So the point is that all of these presumptions that we made about how Beijing would act as it integrated with India or it integrated with Japan or integrated with the United States have all been shown to be false. Because of that, then, the idea of the G2, I think, no longer has any salience, no matter how much a Biden administration might try to recreate it. I think conversely, then, the idea of the Quad, of countries that share an understanding of how would you put it? I mean, I don't want to just say that's because we're democracies, but I think that is important. That India, Japan, Australia, the United States, because we share certain values and because we share certain values about transparency, openness, rule of law, and norms, have increasingly come together and should explicitly and consciously come together